In a heavy, silent courtroom, a boy clutching a battered doll stepped forward, a small, trembling figure in a world built too big and too cruel. But when he opened his mouth and spoke, the entire room froze. This is a story of innocence shattered, of pain carried in tiny arms, and how a simple truth can silence even the most powerful. Location: Downtown Courthouse, Detroit. Time: 11:04 a.m. Monday. The grand courtroom loomed like a cold cathedral, its high ceilings casting long shadows across polished oak benches and somber faces. Every surface gleamed under the harsh lights, as if trying to mask the weight of the decisions made within its walls. Silence gripped the room, thick and unrelenting, broken only by the faint creak of leather shoes shifting uneasily. At the center of it all sat a young black boy, no older than 10, dwarfed by the massive table before him. His small hands clutched a worn doll so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The doll, patched and battered, wore a tiny shirt stitched with the name Liam, its cloth body stained deep red. It looked out of place in the grand seriousness of the room, a child's lifeline against a tide of judgment. The boy's shirt was light blue, crisply ironed, the collar stiff around his thin neck. Someone had taken care to dress him properly, to make him look neat and presentable, but no amount of fabric could hide the trembling of his small frame. His legs swung just above the floor, unable to reach the polished ground, a visible reminder of how very young and fragile he was. Behind the great bench, the judge presided, stone-faced and immovable. His dark robe pooled around him like a shadow, his gavel resting heavily in one hand. He peered down at the boy through rimless glasses, his eyes hard to read, his mouth a tight line that offered no comfort. The gallery was packed, spectators leaning forward, their breath held tight within their chests. Reporters, attorneys, and curious citizens all strained to catch every whisper, every glance, every word. Cameras, though barred, seemed unnecessary. The moment etched itself into the mind's eye with a vividness that no photograph could capture. The prosecutor cleared his throat, the sound startling in the suffocating quiet. All eyes flicked to him, then immediately back to the boy. Every heart in the room seemed to pause, every thought suspended in the same impossible question. What had brought a child to this place, holding that blood-stained doll? The judge raised an eyebrow, the silent signal for the boy to speak. A court official gently prompted him, but the boy's gaze remained locked on the doll, his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. Fear radiated from him, almost tangible, but so too did something else, a stubborn spark of defiance, a quiet refusal to be erased. Moments dragged on like hours. Sweat beaded on foreheads. A woman in the back wiped at her eyes with a tissue she thought no one would see. A man shifted uncomfortably, the scrape of his shoe against the floor sounding louder than any shout. Finally, the boy lifted his head. His eyes, wide and shining with unshed tears, met the judge's. In that single glance, the entire room felt the gravity of the truth he carried, heavy and raw, balanced on the brink of his small voice. He opened his mouth to speak, and the courtroom seemed to lean closer, the marble walls bending inward to catch his words. It was not the voice of a practiced witness or a rehearsed performance. It was the trembling, truthful sound of someone too young to lie and too broken to pretend. The doll shifted slightly in his lap as he gathered the courage. His fingers brushed the stitched name once, twice, as if drawing strength from it. His voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the heavy air with a power no shout could match. The world had come to hear what he had to say, Every prejudice, every assumption, every doubt hung in the balance, waiting to be shattered or confirmed by the honesty of a single child. Have you ever seen the entire world lean closer to hear the smallest voice? Stay with us to hear what Liam's story revealed, and why some truths are too important to ignore. His name was Malik Rhodes. Born into a struggling neighborhood where sirens were more common than lullabies, Malik learned early how to navigate fear. Crumbling sidewalks, abandoned buildings, and corners ruled by the law of survival shaped the map of his childhood. Fear was not just a feeling, it was the air he breathed. When Malik was just 6 years old, his world cracked in half. His parents, caught in a spiral of bad decisions and broken systems, were incarcerated within months of each other. The state stepped in, offering shelter but no real stability. Malik entered the foster system with nothing but a small backpack and wide, watchful eyes. Foster homes became temporary shelters rather than places to belong. Some homes were cold and crowded, others lined with invisible walls of indifference. Every time Malik tried to settle, the ground shifted beneath him. Some nights he slept with packed bags at the foot of his bed, ready for the inevitable move. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. Dreams, too, became burdens too heavy to carry from place to place. In every home, through every move, Malik clung to a single item, a hand-me-down doll gifted by his older sister, a sister taken from him by the same system that swallowed his parents. The doll's name was stitched neatly across its chest, L-I-A-M. Its fabric was worn soft by countless hugs, its stitches carefully repaired after every tear. It was not just a toy. It was a memory of a sister's whispered promises. It was a brother he could carry in his arms. It was the voice that spoke for him when he was too tired or too frightened to speak for himself. Malik tucked Liam into battered duffel bags and under threadbare blankets. He clutched him on bus rides to new homes and kept him hidden from mocking eyes at overcrowded schools. In foster homes where Malik was just another face among many, Liam remained the one constant, the one voice that told him he was still worth something. Sometimes, when the loneliness pressed too hard against his chest, Malik would whisper to Liam in the dark. He would tell the doll about his day, his fears, the fragments of his hopes. In the absence of family, in the silence of uncaring walls, Liam was his universe. His sister's love lived on in every frayed thread and faded stitch. Malik's bond with the doll was not about pretending. It was about remembering. Remembering that he had been loved once, that someone had looked at him and seen not a burden, but a boy with laughter too big for his small frame. Liam was proof that Malik was more than a case number, more than a file to be moved from desk to desk. The streets outside his foster homes were often filled with dangers Malik had learned to sidestep. He could navigate the rhythms of neighborhoods where survival depended on silence and swiftness. He knew when to duck, when to disappear, when to keep his head down. Through it all, Liam stayed tucked inside his jacket or his backpack, never far from reach. Over the years, Malik grew older, and the world asked more of him. It demanded toughness, indifference, a shielded heart. Yet Malik guarded something fiercely within himself. His connection to Liam reminded him that softness was not a weakness. It was a rebellion against a world that tried so hard to strip it away. Have you ever seen someone find their whole universe in a single worn object? Stay with us to discover how Malik's story, anchored by love stitched into faded fabric, would challenge every expectation and change lives in ways no one could have foreseen. One tragic night, under a sky heavy with the threat of rain, Malik wandered near an abandoned lot. It was a patch of cracked concrete and overgrown weeds, a place he knew well. It was where he often escaped to when the walls of his latest foster home felt too tight, too unfamiliar. That night, he had Liam tucked safely in his arm, as always, a steady presence in a world that shifted too often. As he neared the lot, Malik heard shouting. Two older teenagers, faces twisted with anger, were locked in a violent argument that quickly turned into fists. Malik froze, his instincts urging him to disappear into the shadows. But another sound pulled him forward, a sharp cry, high and frightened. Through the dim light, Malik saw her. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, stumbled into the chaos. She was a familiar face, a child from the neighborhood who had often latched onto Malik with the easy trust of the very young. He had protected her from bullies before, walking her home when others pushed and jeered. Before Malik could move, the fight escalated. One of the teenagers, in a reckless swing, struck the girl as she tried to flee. She crumpled to the ground, a fragile figure cradled by cracked pavement. Panic drove Malik forward. Dropping Liam for just a moment, he rushed to her side. Gently, desperately, he lifted her into his arms, her small body frighteningly still. His mind raced. Help was needed. He needed to find someone, anyone, who could make her better. The wail of sirens cut through the night air. Lights flooded the lot, stark and blinding. Authorities poured out of their vehicles, weapons drawn, shouts filling the air. Malik, frozen in place, could do nothing but shield the little girl in his arms. To them, it was a simple, terrible picture. A young black boy, his hands stained red from the girl's injury, a battered doll at his side. No questions were asked, no time was given. Assumptions hardened faster than the concrete under Malik's feet. Officers swarmed him, tearing the girl from his grasp. Rough hands yanked him back, pushing him onto the ground. Malik cried out, not in pain, but in confusion and terror. They saw only what they were ready to see. Innocence was invisible. To them, erased by the color of his skin and the chaos of the scene. Liam, his faithful companion, was scooped up and bagged as evidence. The doll that had cradled Malik's whispered dreams was now tagged and stored as a possible weapon. Malik screamed for them to listen, to look, to understand. But his voice was swallowed by the clamor of flashing lights and harsh commands. Without investigation, without listening, Malik was arrested. A metal door slammed between him and the world he knew. He sat in a holding cell, too small for his fear, too young for the heavy silence that surrounded him. No one came to ask his side of the story. No one thought to wonder if the boy with the trembling hands and the tear-streaked face had not caused harm but had tried to heal it. The weight of misunderstanding bore down on him. In every shifting hour, Malik clung to memories of Liam, to the faint hope that somewhere, someone would see what had truly happened. Yet time stretched long and merciless. Adults passed by with clipboards and grim expressions, never once meeting his desperate gaze. Outside the cell, the story began to spread, distorted and half-formed. Whispers grew into headlines, and judgment fell swiftly. In a world too quick to point fingers, Malik's innocence was buried beneath layers of fear and prejudice. He had done what was right. He had rushed to help. But the world, eager to cast blame, refused to see past the surface. Have you ever seen innocence mistaken for guilt in a single glance? Stay with us as we unravel the truth Malik carried, and how one child's courage battled the crushing weight of assumption. Malik sat small and alone in the cavernous courtroom, a sea of strange faces swirling around him. None of them looked at him and saw a boy. They saw their own fears projected onto his thin frame. Fear sharpened their gazes and hardened their expressions. Compassion, if it had ever been present, had long since been packed away with their briefcases. The prosecution wasted no time weaving a narrative of danger and delinquency. They labeled him troubled, dangerous, unsupervised. They spoke about his background as if it were a disease, about his lack of stable family as if it were a crime. Their words were not just accusations. They were sentences, handed down without pause or question. Malik's court-appointed lawyer sat beside him, but the distance between them felt like a canyon. The man flipped through papers with an air of disinterest, offering no reassuring words, no fierce defense. His focus was not on Malik's innocence, but on closing the case with as little complication as possible. To him, Malik was just another file to be moved off his desk, another burden to be processed. The evidence table stood at the center of the courtroom like an altar. Upon it, placed with dramatic flair, lay Liam, Malik's precious doll. The doll's light blue shirt, once stitched with love, was now cruelly spotlighted, the deep red stain circled in photographs and spoken of as if it were proof of guilt. To the spectators, it was a prop. To Malik, it was a piece of his soul laid bare and misunderstood. Malik's eyes never left the doll. While attorneys argued and witnesses speculated, he stared at it with a silent, aching intensity. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles whitened. He had nothing else to hold on to, nothing else to anchor him against the tide of voices rising to paint him into something he was not. The courtroom buzzed with judgment. Spectators whispered, casting glances laced with suspicion and disgust. Reporters scribbled headlines in the making, already sure of the story they would tell. No one asked who Malik really was. No one cared to wonder why a boy would cradle a child in his arms rather than run. They saw only the surface, the blood, the broken pieces, and they filled in the blanks with their own fears. The judge, perched high above them all, watched the proceedings with an inscrutable expression. The gavel in his hand tapped impatiently against the bench. To him, it was another long day in a long line of difficult days. Malik's future was a matter of paperwork, not humanity. Finally, after hours of being spoken about but never spoken to, the judge turned his gaze on Malik. His voice cut through the thick air of the courtroom. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" The room held its breath. Even the creaking of chairs fell silent. All eyes turned to the small boy whose life was being dissected before them. Malik swallowed hard. His throat was dry and raw, his heart pounding against his ribs like a frantic drum. He looked up, first at the judge, then back at Liam lying exposed on the table. His mouth opened slightly, the weight of everything he wanted to say pressing against the cage of his ribs. He wanted to scream that he had only tried to help, that he had acted out of instinct and love, not violence, that the doll was not evidence of a crime, but proof of the boy he still was, no matter how the world tried to twist him into something monstrous. But the words did not come. Fear, exhaustion, and despair closed his throat. Malik sat frozen, voiceless, as the courtroom continued to see only what it wanted to see. Have you ever seen a child stand trial without ever standing a chance? Stay with us to witness how truth struggles to find its voice when the world refuses to listen. Slowly, Malik rose from his chair, the worn legs of it scraping lightly against the polished floor. His hands trembled as he clutched the doll tight against his chest, holding it like a shield, holding it like the last piece of safety he had left in the world. His light blue shirt, still crisply ironed from the morning, seemed far too formal for the rawness of the moment. The courtroom, already thick with tension, seemed to hold its breath. Eyes locked onto Malik, waiting to see if the boy would crumble or lash out, never imagining he might simply speak the truth. Malik shifted his gaze to the empty witness chair where the injured girl should have been. He lifted a shaking hand and gestured toward it. "This belonged to her," he said, his voice cracking into the silence. His fingers brushed the faded lettering on the doll's chest, tracing the name Liam, stitched there with careful, loving hands. The judge, who had started to lean back in his seat, froze mid-motion. The gavel that had been resting loosely in his hand stopped its impatient tapping. Even the prosecution, confident and sharp all morning, leaned back slightly, their mouths tightening with uncertainty. Malik took a deep breath, one that seemed to gather all the scattered fragments of his courage. He spoke again, his words slow but heartbreakingly clear. "I promised her," he said. His voice was barely louder than a whisper, but it carried through the room with stunning force. "I promised I would protect her. She was scared of the boys who hurt her. She told me stories when we played. She named the doll Liam because she said Liam would keep us safe." His arms tightened around the doll, as if remembering the nights they had spent tucked into abandoned corners, sharing whispered hopes that most children their age never had to know. "I did not hurt her," Malik said, his voice trembling but steady. "I was trying to save her." The courtroom became utterly silent, the kind of silence that is not empty but full of realization, full of regret, full of truths too long ignored. The prosecuting attorney lowered her eyes to her notes, suddenly uncertain. A few spectators shifted awkwardly, their previous certainty crumbling into discomfort. The reporters, pens poised mid-sentence, froze in their writing, not sure whether to continue or listen. At the evidence table, the doll lay quietly under the harsh courtroom lights, no longer just an object of suspicion. It became, in that moment, a symbol of Malik's heart, of his desperate attempt to cling to love and promises even when the world gave him every reason to let go. The judge studied Malik with a changed expression, the stern lines of his face softening into something closer to humanity. His hand, still frozen in midair, lowered the gavel slowly to the bench, as if he realized he could no longer pound down judgment so easily. Malik's knees wobbled slightly under the weight of the room's attention, but he stood firm. He looked not at the faces that judged him, but at the space where his friend should have been. His truth hung there between them, fragile and fierce. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time since the proceedings began, Malik was not just a defendant or a headline. He was a boy who had kept a promise, a boy who had fought to protect the smallest glimmer of hope he had left. Have you ever heard a single sentence split an entire world open? Stay with us to witness how a moment of truth can rewrite a story the world thought it already knew. The courtroom remained suspended in stunned silence as Malik's words lingered in the air, heavier than any gavel's strike. It was a moment no one could dismiss, and it demanded action. Almost immediately, the judge ordered an expedited review of the evidence, his earlier detachment replaced by a growing sense of urgency. The first cracks in the prosecution's story appeared quickly. Footage from a security camera mounted across the street was retrieved. For reasons no one could quite explain, it had been overlooked before. The grainy video played on the courtroom monitor, showing exactly what Malik had tried to describe. It captured the two older teenagers arguing violently, fists flying. It showed the small figure of the little girl standing at a distance, frightened and unsure. It showed the fateful swing that sent her collapsing to the ground. Moments later, Malik appeared on screen, running toward her, not away. He knelt beside her, frantic and gentle, gathering her into his arms as the first sirens wailed in the distance. There was no violence in his movements, only desperation and care. No jury needed coaching to see the truth laid bare in those few seconds of footage. As the tape ended, a hush fell over the room once more, this time filled with something different. Guilt began to creep into the corners where certainty once lived. Witnesses, previously silent, now came forward. A neighbor testified that Malik was well known in the area for his kindness to younger children. She told of afternoons when Malik sat outside reading to them, of mornings when he slipped part of his breakfast into small hands that had no meals waiting at home. She spoke of a boy who had already learned how to be a guardian long before anyone had taught him to defend himself. Another witness, a grocer from a nearby corner store, recalled seeing Malik offer his own snack to a crying toddler when a mother had been too distracted to notice her child's tears. Story after story emerged, weaving a new picture that stood in sharp contrast to the one painted by the prosecution. Attention then turned back to the doll, Liam, lying quietly in its plastic evidence bag. A forensic review was hastily conducted. The results returned quicker than expected, almost embarrassingly so. The red stain, once so ominous in the courtroom's narrative, was not blood. It was juice, specifically grape juice from a bottle that had been dropped during a playground scuffle earlier that same day. A minor incident, forgotten by everyone except the fabric of Malik's beloved companion. With each revelation, the pillars of the prosecution's case crumbled like paper walls. The narrative of a dangerous boy transformed into the truth of a brave one. The image of guilt they had so easily accepted faded under the relentless glare of facts that could no longer be ignored. The prosecuting attorney stumbled through a request for recess, their once confident voice cracking under the weight of a collapsing argument. The defense attorney, suddenly animated, began filing motions for dismissal, citing wrongful accusation and procedural negligence. It was a flurry of legal terms, but beneath it all, it was something simpler, justice finally beginning to stir. Malik watched it all with wide, wary eyes, his hand never leaving the doll's side. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. It was not over yet, not really. Years of betrayal had taught him that hope must be approached cautiously. But a small spark lit within him, stubborn and persistent. Across the room, the judge leaned forward, his steepled fingers pressed against his mouth. He studied Malik not with suspicion now, but with something closer to respect. In that moment, the courtroom that had been built to judge him began, slowly, to listen instead. Have you ever seen lies disintegrate under the bright light of truth? Stay with us as Malik's journey continues, proving that even the most fragile voices can bring entire systems to their knees when courage and truth walk hand in hand. The courtroom sat wrapped in a stillness so complete it seemed almost unnatural. The judge, once a towering figure of authority and cold procedure, now appeared visibly shaken. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses and looked down at the small boy standing bravely before him. The evidence had spoken louder than any attorney ever could. The security footage, the witness testimonies, the forensic report, every piece pointed not to guilt, but to innocence, to compassion, to bravery, to a boy who had acted not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to protect. The judge cleared his throat, the sound breaking the heavy silence. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but steady. "The charges against Malik Rhodes are dismissed," he said, each word deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of regret. He paused, his gaze softening as it fell on Malik. For a moment it seemed as though he might simply end it there. But he did not. In a move few had ever witnessed in that solemn room, the judge rose from his bench. He set down his gavel and stepped forward, shedding the distance that the courtroom walls so often created. He looked at Malik not as a case number, not as a defendant, but as a child who had endured what no child should ever have to endure. "I owe you an apology," the judge said, his voice breaking slightly. "I apologize for the assumptions made. I apologize for the way the system failed you. I apologize for the fear you should never have had to carry into this courtroom." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the spectators. Even the prosecuting attorney shifted uncomfortably, the polished certainty of their arguments reduced to dust. Malik stood frozen, gripping Liam tighter against his chest. Tears welled up and streaked down his cheeks, not from fear this time, but from a fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, the world had room for someone like him, after all. His knees wobbled slightly, but he stayed on his feet, holding on to the doll, holding on to the moment. It was not an easy thing to believe in kindness after seeing so much cruelty. It was not an easy thing to accept that he had been seen, really seen, as a child deserving of mercy and protection. The courtroom, once filled with judgment and suspicion, now felt different. Reporters lowered their pens, their earlier narratives slipping through their fingers. Spectators who had once leaned forward in hunger for drama now leaned back in shame. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others simply bowed their heads. Malik was no longer a symbol of fear. He was not a headline. He was not a file to be processed. He was a boy who had clung to hope with both hands, even when the world had given him every reason to let go. The judge returned to his bench, his shoulders heavier but his gaze clearer. Malik's lawyer, who had spent too many days thinking only of his next case, now looked at the boy with something resembling pride, a silent vow to never again underestimate the power of a child's voice. Malik swiped at his tears with the back of his hand, his fingers brushing over Liam's stitched name. His doll, once presented as damning evidence, was now restored to its rightful place, a symbol of love, of promise, of survival. For the first time in months, Malik stood in a room full of adults and was seen not as a threat, not as a problem to be solved, but as a child worthy of protection, compassion, and respect. He did not need to say anything else. His presence, his resilience, and his undeniable courage spoke louder than any final words could. Have you ever seen a heart stitch itself back together in a single moment? Stay with us as Malik's journey continues, proving that healing begins when someone chooses to truly see the soul behind the struggle. The story of Malik Rhodes did not remain confined to the walls of a single courtroom. It broke free, carried by whispers of injustice that soon grew into a roaring demand for change. News outlets seized upon the story, their headlines blazoned across screens and pages. Boy wrongfully accused while saving a friend. Images of Malik clutching his doll, tears streaming down his face, spread across social media platforms and nightly broadcasts. The sight of a small boy, burdened not only by grief but by the unfairness of a system built to doubt him, touched hearts around the world. For many, it was a chilling reminder of how quickly innocence could be mistaken for guilt. Civil rights groups responded swiftly and fiercely. Prominent leaders, once locked in battles for other causes, found unity in Malik's story. They organized rallies and peaceful demonstrations. They flooded legislative offices with petitions demanding reform in how young black boys were treated within the justice system. Malik became a symbol of a much larger fight, a human face placed on statistics too easily ignored. Panels were convened. Policies were scrutinized. Judges, police chiefs, and lawmakers found themselves called to account in town halls and televised debates. Malik's story was no longer just about a single boy in a single city. It became a national reckoning about race, childhood, and fairness. Voices that had been ignored for too long now rose together, steady and unrelenting. Donations began pouring into the foster care program that had once offered Malik only the barest thread of protection. With new funding, resources improved almost overnight. Foster homes were inspected more rigorously. Training for caregivers became mandatory. Programs focusing on trauma-informed care were established. Malik's name became synonymous with hope for others still trapped in a system too often stacked against them. The ripples of his truth reached even further. Letters arrived daily, messages of encouragement and apology from strangers who had seen the truth of his heart through the fog of their own assumptions. Children from across the country sent drawings, cards, and handmade dolls of their own, wanting to show Malik that they stood with him. One letter, delivered by special courier, came from an ocean away. It bore the seal of the Vatican and the personal blessing of Pope Francis himself. Inside, written in a hand both delicate and strong, were words that Malik would carry with him forever. Blessed are those who defend the innocent even when no one is looking. Malik held that letter in his hands for a long time, tracing the words slowly, trying to absorb the meaning. He had felt invisible for so long. Now, people he had never met, people he could barely imagine, had seen him, truly seen him, and declared that his truth mattered. Television segments aired long interviews with legal experts, child psychologists, and civil rights historians. They used Malik's story as a case study in systemic failure and a rallying cry for sweeping reform. Documentaries began production, filmmakers drawn to the power of a single child's courage to expose deep-rooted injustice. Malik, once a shadow, in crowded courtrooms and forgotten foster homes, found himself standing in the light. Opportunities came that he could never have dreamed of. Scholarships, mentorship programs, and offers of new homes where love was promised, not rationed. Through it all, Malik remained grounded. He never saw himself as a hero. In his heart, he knew he had done what anyone should do. He had tried to protect someone smaller, someone more vulnerable. That the world had made it extraordinary said more about its brokenness than about his own bravery. Still, Malik smiled more easily now. He spoke more freely. He clutched Liam not out of fear, but as a reminder of how far he had come, of promises kept and innocence reclaimed. Have you ever seen one child's truth ripple out to shake an entire system? Stay with us as Malik's journey continues, a living testament that even the smallest voice can spark the loudest call for justice. Today, Malik Rhodes stands not in the shadow of a courtroom, but in the full light of his future. Once a frightened boy clinging to a single worn doll, he is now an honor roll student and a passionate youth advocate for child welfare reform. His journey from wrongful accusation to national inspiration is not just a personal triumph. It is a beacon for countless others still struggling to find their voice. Malik travels across cities and states, invited to speak at conferences, schools, and legislative meetings. Wherever he goes, he carries Liam, the same hand-stitched doll that once sat on an evidence table, misinterpreted and misunderstood. Malik holds Liam high during his speeches, not as a relic of a painful past, but as a living reminder of resilience and truth. He tells the story of what nearly happened to him. He describes the night that changed everything, the assumptions made against him, and the painful silence he was forced to endure. Yet he also speaks of the day when light pierced the darkness, when evidence and courage combined to set him free. His voice, once so small and tentative, now rings with confidence, each word woven with the hard-earned wisdom of survival. The courtroom, where he was once judged too quickly, has been transformed as well. Each year, it hosts Day of Innocence ceremonies, events dedicated to recognizing the power of listening before judging. Malik is the guest of honor at every ceremony. He stands before a crowd that now sees him clearly, that now knows better because of him. On Day of Innocence, children who were once labeled troubled are honored for their courage. Families come to learn about the importance of empathy and understanding. Judges, attorneys, and law enforcement officers attend workshops on systemic reform. It is a day of growth, reflection, and hope, and it belongs to Malik as much as it belongs to every child who ever feared they would not be believed. When Malik takes the stage, he does not wear bitterness on his shoulders. He wears pride. He stands tall, Liam cradled against his chest, a symbol not of weakness, but of unbreakable strength. Each year, his speeches end with the same powerful reminder. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply hold on. These words resonate beyond the walls of the courtroom. They ripple outward into homes, schools, courtrooms, and legislative halls. They remind every listener that bravery is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is a small boy refusing to let go of the truth when the world demands he be silent. Malik's advocacy has led to tangible change. Policies have been rewritten. Foster care programs have been overhauled. Training programs now teach professionals how to recognize trauma and resilience rather than jumping to suspicion. Children who once faced a system ready to fail them are now met with a growing army of advocates armed with Malik's story and determination. Yet Malik knows the work is not finished. Every day, new challenges arise. Every day, a child somewhere still faces a wall of doubt too high to climb alone. That is why he continues to speak, to stand, to fight, for them and for the child he once was. His journey is a testament that the smallest voices often carry the greatest truths. It is a reminder that innocence must never be an afterthought, and that every child deserves the dignity of being heard before being judged. If you believe that every child deserves to be heard before they are judged, share this story. Someone's heart may depend on it.